we're going to open with some conversation anyway. So if folks kind of drift in, that'll work just fine, actually. So I'm Claire Berry. I am the campus minister for UKirk Nashville, which is the Presbyterian campus ministry. Now we have your attention. The Presbyterian campus ministry, primarily serving Vanderbilt and Belmont universities. So that's what I do is my full-time ministry gig. I'm in validated ministry with the Presbyterian Church USA. So what that means is I'm not called and installed at a congregation, but I have a ministry that the presbytery says, yes, we support what she's doing. She can be a part of our benefits program. This can count toward her pension. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. And then prior to that, I was an associate pastor at a large church in Austin, Texas for 4 years. And before that, I was in seminary at Princeton Seminary. I had a prior career. I mean, the further this gets in the rear view, it's like, can you even call that a career? But I had a moment in time where I worked in the public education system as well. And so that's just a little bit about me. And then if you haven't heard already, I did grow up here. So I remember various iterations of these buildings. Being in Fellowship Hall still reminds me of wearing like a polyester beard and like being in a Bible play, always as like a non-speaking man. So that's my history here. And if you know my folks, they're Ray and Doug Berry, and my brothers were the ones who were like always playing the cello in the early 2000s. So what I'm going to do is not to stand so close to that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give an update just about UKirk. I'm going to introduce you to it by talking about the past year that we've had. I'm also going to share about the school year that's about to start. And most importantly to me today is to kind of go beyond that surface stuff to delve into what it is we're really doing when we do campus ministry. Some of the theory or theology, if you will, behind a ministry like what UKirk is. Toward that end, this going deeper, I actually kind of thought we could bring our own experiences in. And so with whoever is around you in groups of 2 or 3, I just want you to think back to the time in your own life that was right after high school, whatever you were doing, whether you went to college or were doing something else. And just think about and talk about what that experience of church was. So did you belong to a faith community, campus ministry, church? Did you feel included in what you were doing? Were you interested in faith at that time? Not so much. If you had doubts, did you talk about those with anybody? You might not touch on all of these, but it's just to kind of get your mind going, and let's get into the mindset of our younger selves. And I will join some of you for this as well. And we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Okay. y'all take just a minute longer on this. Just talking about what our experiences of faith in high school, entering college, or post high school were. All right, so as you reached out toward your younger self, what did you remember? What did you find about that time? Just a few people. Yeah. Interesting. And it sounded like you kind of went back towards something familiar and known, and maybe where you had some community already. Yeah, interesting. Great. Thanks. Anybody else just want to talk about what came up? Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks, Mo. That's really interesting to think about. So I think a few things that I just want to lift up that are still happening on campus that are common to that experience, actually to both of these experiences named. So one thing I'm going to keep coming back to is that one of the main things, if not the main thing that students want from campus ministry is a community. They want people who know them, who they can know. It's just like knowing and being known is something they really want. And they're going to get it, you know. The other thing I think is just it's a developmental stage. Some deconstruction of faith, especially if you grew up in the faith, is extremely normal in college. I think it tends to throw those of us who maybe are at a stage of not deconstructing so much, it can kind of throw us off or give us some fear. But it's very, very normal. Students will kind of come to me and they'll say, well, I'm just not so sure about church. And my attitude toward that tends to be like, you're not scaring me. So when I was an undergraduate myself, I went to church, I would say most Easters. I like found somebody who would find a church to go to with me. My cousin was in church with me. She grew up practicing Episcopalian and in college with me, and she would go to the Episcopalian campus ministry, and I would darken the door with her. But it was not my community. And so I think some degree of feeling uncertain about what faith means to you is just this kind of normal thing that's happening. Yeah, Guy. One of the crazy things was moving Jewish and newer supposedly the struggle and a Palestinian Jew, that's our third. And we can visit the problem on city. But we were freshmen on the end of the public class in four. And when you ever class, push you guys to be here as past speaker, very new age. Yeah. And I just got all about it. And I'm sitting there in that big, ballroom at a hotel that is
you know, he's done something, and I'm not buying it. Part of it was, you know, there was no, but I now want to stop for humanity. There's no sense of sin. And I knew it enough that that wasn't right. And so I'm going to go into the open and family and loving people that I have for the weekend when I freshman year. And sideline after early game expecting Easter, you want to be first.
Yeah.
But that new church, although it's not like that, and realizing the breathe the community that you put out before you get fully in our together.
Yeah, no, those are great points too. So I think like it's a time for exploration. We certainly have students who come in and say, well, I was looking for something like my youth group and then I found it in Newkirk. And I'm like, wow, great. That's wonderful that it feels like really similar to what you had before. And then I think for just as many students, they're having more of an experience of, okay, that was then and this is now. And having your friends go to something is still a very, very powerful force. We were kind of talking about that over here. You know, if you show up to your first week of class and your roommate is really enthusiastic about going to this ministry or that ministry, you know, that party even, right? You're more likely to go to that than to something else. And then I think if you don't resonate with it, like Guy's experience with Est, he was just talking about, like, if there's something about it that you don't like, it takes a lot of courage to then say, well, now I'm going to seek something else instead of just kind of dropping out. So all of that stuff that y'all were talking about, it could have come from students today. So what we're doing at UKirk at the most basic level is we're creating a community and a place for spiritual growth. And we focus on 3 different areas for that. One is that we're just focused on deepening relationships through having a fellowship. Experiencing God through worship. So this is interesting. Not every campus ministry has worship every single week, but we worship in a reform mode. Yes, it's pretty casual every single week. And then we also want to encourage discipleship and a walk of faith through service opportunities. This is our mission. We mostly serve Vanderbilt and Belmont students. That's where we're an official student organization. However, I currently have a couple of perspectives from Lipscomb. We're not able to be a campus organization at Lipscomb due to some theological differences. But we are able to have any student who wants to come and be with us. You know, I've also got some trade school students, some cosmetology students who I think might come and hang out, which would be new. And every single week, like I said, we worship, and that happens on Thursday night. We have a dinner that's provided by volunteers. I know many of you already know this. And then we worship together. All of this takes place at St. Augustine's Chapel, which is an Episcopal chapel on Vanderbilt's campus. Every Thursday night turns into a Presbyterian campus ministry. We pay them a very fair rental fee for that. And we're able to do things like pay rental fees because of the generosity of the local church. So UKirk was founded as a Presbyterian student fellowship in the late 1930s by churches including Westminster. And churches in the Presbyterian Church USA and the Cumberland Presbyterian Church are who give us our support. So coming from both church budgets, presbytery budgets, and from individuals, it's Presbyterians who are making this happen. And so I want you to really think about this as your ministry. I think sometimes we can start to think, well, there aren't as many young adults in our pews as we would like, but you are doing ministry with young adults. And so since this is your ministry, I just invite you to give any input you have, ask me any question. This really occurs in collaboration with you and with God's Spirit. So I just want to share with you a little bit about last year. This is us at St. A's. It was a really wonderful year for ministry. We experienced growth in every meaningful respect. I think part of this is a post-pandemic comeback, if you will. But our average participation on Thursday nights more than doubled if you compare it to fall 2021. So that's when things first got restarted in person. And our regular group of students who are coming to events every week, every other week maybe, grew to about 25. And so that kind of critical mass is something that I'm really excited about. It's always a revolving door because you have people graduate and then you have new students come. If you think about it, it means our ministry changes by 40% of its members, ish, every single year, because you lose a class, you gain a class, and only the 3 years in the middle kind of stay the same. So it doesn't really make sense to talk about numbers in the same way you would in a congregation. Sometimes it's not all that useful to talk about numbers anyway. But I do think that when we have a group of a certain size, not only are we just reaching more students with what we do, which we think is a good thing, but it also makes it more attractive to newcomers, particularly to newcomers who are college students, to show up to something that has some dynamism and some energy and enough different kinds of people that you can look around and say, oh, I'll probably fit in here. A certain kind of size helps it not to feel like a clique, where if you look around and you go, well, I don't really feel about faith the way these guys seem to, So when you have a large enough group, I think people can start to see, I have a place. And I think that what I'm most excited about is really the quality of the fellowship. So as you have people come and they say, well, I feel like I have a place. We've been able to create more depth and more intimacy in the fellowship. So I think for one thing, it's just taking masks off. I think there's something that's really helped with just being a year further away from the lockdown experience, where people are just connecting better. They're more carefree. You have to remember that all of these students, just like all of us, they missed those personal connections for a while. And so they've bonded together really quickly. And I'm actually working with some of our recent alums to have a virtual community, because I think they only kind of just started to have a normal college experience of forming friendships. And I want for them to be able to take these friendships with them and kind of keep growing in them because of the college experience that denied them that. And finally, I'll just say financially, we had a good year. We exceeded our fundraising goal at our annual fundraiser, Soul and Spirits. We ran our fiscal year finishing slightly ahead, which is good for us after the pandemic. And our donor base grew back up to pre-pandemic levels. We have churches who have started giving who actually haven't given recently. Some of them have never given before. So we're broadening our base among individual donors and among churches. So I'm excited for that. I think a ministry like this, sort of a parachurch ministry, needs a broad base of support to be sustainable. So good year. Excited for next year. This is what I'm kind of thinking about all the time. So one goal that I have for this year that's about to start is just to keep increasing our participation, again, so we can reach more people with what we do, and so we can just make it a better community for everybody. And we're starting the year with a really dedicated core group of about 14 who haven't graduated. Most of them are also not soon to graduate, which is really great for growth. And I'd really like to double it. I want to keep on growing and focus on Vanderbilt students who at the moment are in our minority. So that's a little weird. We meet on Vanderbilt campus. It seems like it might be mainly Vanderbilt students. I think this really just has to do with the student bodies and the way the universities are organized. Belmont has, with its Christian bent, it's both something about the student body. I think you do have more students who come to Belmont who are religious. I think you also have more students who, when they're maybe having trouble in their lives, show up to the chaplain's office and say, hey, can you help me out, chaplain? And then we have wonderful chaplains at Belmont who say yes, and they'll meet with you as often as you want to meet, but they will also direct you to a campus ministry to be your community. And so we have a really wonderful facilitation on the Belmont side where the chaplains will say, hey, I just talked to so-and-so, they grew up Presbyterian, here you go. Or they grew up this way, but they're wanting to explore what it would look like to be in a tradition that ordains women. Here you go, so that's really wonderful. And I think on the Vanderbilt side, I think all of those things, like students are maybe less religious on the whole. If they're having trouble, they tend to show up to counseling and not to the chaplain. And then because they're not there, there's not this sort of system with this facility to sort of get students to us. So we have to recruit a little bit more intentionally. And so that's one of the things I'm thinking about is quite how to do that. Yeah, Lokil. No, I have not. So from time to time, yes, we have one dedicated member who is a graduate student right now at Peabody. Another perspective who I'm talking to, we do kind of run into the issue of you either have to be a graduate student who's really cool hanging out with undergraduates, or you need to be a graduate student who's willing to, hey, like, let's figure out, kind of start something new. Princeton University's UKIRK, or Presbyterian Student Fellowship, has done this really well. I think because of the presence of the seminary next door, they've been able to say, we're one fellowship and we have some things that graduate students do and some things that undergrads do. But at this point, we're very undergraduate heavy. And my sense is that we always have been. So the second thing that I'm really focused on is just developing our culture a bit more. So UKIRK is a very inclusive ministry. It's been important to our students that it's open and affirming, especially in the increasingly contentious, I would say, atmosphere in our state. So we really just want to send a message to our students who are lesbian, gay, transgender, that this is a place that you can be. And students are helping me see ways that we can just communicate about that clearly. And the second aspect of our culture that I'm really hoping to deepen is our Reformed identity. So a funny thing about campus ministry is it's very denominationally organized. There's UKIRK for Presbyterians. There's Reformed University Fellowship if you're PCA. There's the Wesley Fellowship if you're Methodist. It's very organized by denomination, and that's where you get your support, right? But we all know that people are identifying less and less with that. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we cultivate that side of our identity so people can see how it's different, while also showing students that if you want to read something that Calvin has said, or that, you look at one of our Presbyterian confessions and you have a question about it, or you take an issue with it, we can talk about that. It's a tradition. Tradition is something that's been handed on to you that you now hand on, you can shape it. And so I'm wanting to kind of explore that with them, I guess, so that our identity as a Presbyterian ministry kind of makes more sense. Yeah, it's not that you have to be Presbyterian to be in UKIRK, but I think we are doing a Presbyterian thing. And I want that to be a little more forward. And then finally, I'm just trying to put more things back in the students' hands. When students were meeting on Zoom, it was very easy to just be passive and kind of a consumer of the ministry. And they didn't have models for what student leadership looked like. And so we're trying to rebuild that part, because I think this can be an important incubator for ministry in the church. When students see, oh, it's not just a pastor kind of saying things and doing stuff to me, that I have a role to play. I'm going to talk more about this third point in a second, that we're trying to support their mental health, their friendships, and their ability to discuss difficult topics. These are just the areas of need that come up the most with students. So I'm going to spend more time with them. And then finally, we're working on strengthening our service component. I think service is the thing that's had the toughest time coming back from the pandemic, in-person service opportunities, but students really enjoy them. We made dinner for Nashville Launchpad at one point in the winter, and that was one of their favorite things we did. And so I'm actually talking with Kelly Christie about students joining the Westminster Habitat Bill. hopefully for a day or two in September and October. So that's one of the ways that we can really collaborate with local churches too, is by doing service together. Yeah. It kind of depends, and it's very much up to us. So we've shared worship before with the Methodist group on campus. We simply have a lot in common. I get along with the campus minister. I interact with the chaplains from the various groups because we are gathered together by the university chaplain every so often. So every month or so, I'll see all the other campus ministers, and at Vanderbilt, the rabbis, and we'll kind of share about how ministry is going. And I really do enjoy that. In terms of our groups getting together, though, it happens a little bit more occasionally, I would say. Yeah. So this is a meme. Stop normalizing the grind and normalize whatever this is. So I sent this meme to students one fall morning as a reminder that we were having coffee in an hour. And I said, it's Euchre, whatever this is, it's Euchre. It was a joke, but I actually keep coming back to this as a pretty good explanation of what we're doing. So stop normalizing the grind. I don't know if y'all have heard about grind culture, but this idea that you always have to be working hard and achieving. So stop normalizing the grind. I think especially for students, they feel really competitive about academic work. It really helps them to step away from that. And so it's an invitation to just give that up for a minute, surrender the illusion that your self-worth is defined by what you do, right? Works righteousness, right? Just give it up for a minute and go and simply be with other people for an hour. I love this image, normalize whatever this is, sort of an invitation to look carefully and say, well, what is this? It's very cozy. You've got the different animals of the 100-acre wood with their different personalities. Like, just think about like what Rabbit is like and what Tigger is like, what Pooh is like. They're different from each other, but they're all friends. They're huddled together. They're at table. We drink a lot of coffee in Newkirk, we're Christians. They're sharing. And as I look at this picture, I'm like, well, they're being warmed, they're being re-energized, maybe they're being comforted by what's happening. And then as I look even closer, I realize that the Pooh is talking, and the others are listening, and they're looking at him. It's pretty amazing, actually, how this animator has shown that they're actively listening to him with care. And I do feel like this is what we're trying to do. And why we're doing it is really because of three facts. So one is that mental health issues are occurring on college campuses in high incidence. And part of that is due to things like social media. Studies really now show that that's just true. Part of it is due to sort of anxiety related to achievement, making good grades. But whatever it is, whether it's competition or comparing yourself to other people or other things going on in your life, this is just really on the upswing. And one of the things that can most help people is to have a community. And I think students are making that community piece hard on themselves because it's very easy and socially accepted to isolate yourself, so maybe you're a really good student and so you're spending a lot of time alone doing your homework. But students will also say to me, I stayed up until this odd hour, and I'm like, oh, what were you doing? And I was watching YouTube videos, and so this kind of like doom scrolling, right, is this other term that gets used, right? And so as they increasingly spend time, if they're not working, on screen, I also notice that sometimes they're just really only hanging out with a couple of roommates, and that's their community, and so we're trying to split that open a bit, and bring people together because it's Wednesday morning and it's 10 a.m. I also think that the conversation aspect is really important because students across the political spectrum will express to me how much they fear being canceled. They talk about being in classes and trying to figure out what the professor's opinion is so that they can stick as close to that as possible and not end up saying something controversial. And this isn't just conservative students who say this to me. It's liberal or progressive students as well. And I just think there's this perfectionism, sort of a low tolerance for saying something wrong, no culture of apology or forgiveness. If you did say something wrong, heaven forbid, that's just making students kind of scared of communicating. And so I think the fact that we do get together to communicate is really important. And I'm trying to come at it a little more directly this fall with a series I'm calling Hot Topics, where we're just going to try to talk about controversial subjects from a faith perspective and invite some people in to talk with us. And students are actually going to tell me what we should be talking about. So I do think that we're practicing discourse, or practicing theological discourse together. So the fact that they're talking is important. I don't know if y'all read this book. It's a great book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's really about trauma and healing from trauma. But for a book on a very serious issue, it's really hopeful. I bring it here less because, students are necessarily trauma survivors, though some are. But the thing is, as I work with students who are anxious, at times depressed, I think this quotation actually describes very well what they mean. Our capacity to destroy one another is matched by our capacity to heal one another. Restoring relationships and community is central to restoring well-being. I just really do believe that a community can help heal you and make you stronger. And that's something we can do for one another. And the student in this picture is actually giving a sort of a personal testimony. So this is one thing that we've done, is especially to have our leaders kind of get up and share a little bit about their faith and be heard. And I think when you hear somebody else's story, that automatically creates some empathy, both for them and for yourself. And I think a willingness to be vulnerable yourself. So just working on restoring community, restoring relationships, and building each other up. And I think that's really sacred work. So I think community is sacred. And it was in preparing for this presentation that I realized that whatever this is, I don't know, might also be this. 3 people sitting around a table with an open seat for you. I don't know if y'all recognize this image. It's an Eastern Orthodox icon of the Trinity that is meant to be adored from the front, and with the implication being that there's an open space for you. So I realized that this is that. Well, I love this thing. Yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures, and I was really trying to close read that Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, I have now, as of this week. Yeah. I'm just going to offer y'all a couple more things. This is from Rachel Held Evans. Most young adults I know aren't looking for a religion that answers all their questions, but rather a community of faith in which they feel safe to ask them. As I was preparing this presentation, I was like, I just haven't really talked much about like faith development and what I teach them. I've talked a lot about community so far, and I really do think that for this age, especially, that creation of community kind of comes first. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think students have even said to me, speaking of Eastern Orthodoxy, so I had an Eastern Orthodox student, a Russian Orthodox student, from Moldova last year, and he only started coming to worship at the very end of the year, but all year he came to our coffee gathering at Vanderbilt. And when I first met him, I was like, well, tell me more about like why you're here. You know, there always has to be a conversation like that. I think especially when you meet a student who's just really not Presbyterian. Like, why did you come to our thing? And he just said to me kind of point blank, he said, you know, this pandemic has been really hard. I've been depressed, and I know that community would help me. And I met your student president at a tabling event, and I just enjoyed talking to her. And so I came to this one. And I'm like, okay. And all year I kept saying to him, I was like, well, come to worship, you know, do you want to come on Thursday night? Dinner's free, you know, that kind of thing. And he wouldn't come. I thought, that's okay, you know. I think just like in a church, you have people who are kind of all the way in the inner sanctum, and you have people who are kind of hanging out in the doorway. That's cool. I like doorway people. And yeah, it was only at the very end of the year that he kind of started to come. He said, I wish I'd been doing this the whole time. And I don't think it's because, you know, of the beauty of our Reformed worship. I mean, I hope it's beautiful. I hope it's a meaningful experience, you know, but it was just that he wished he'd taken a closer step into the community, I think, than he did. So I know my time is limited, but this is a really cool graphic that was just released by UKirk National. So our organizations are all separate from each other. We're like a network of campus ministries, but we do have a national board that offers guidance and curriculum and a sense of community for us as ministers. It's really great. And I know that the type here is kind of small, but they spelled this out in this recent curriculum. I really think it provides an accurate picture of what we're doing at UKirk. And it's important to note that it starts at the top. So in the stages of faith integration or faith development, belonging is first. And so just in case you can't read what it says there, it says, I come to know others and be known in a community of any size that accepts, loves, and celebrates the fullness of my authentic self without agenda or judgment, and offers safe space for me to discover my true self. I think this is the first thing we do. I think for some students, this is all we do. And I'm getting used to that. Your former associate pastor, Rachel Pinmore, once just described to me campus ministry as, I'm just letting students know that they're loved. That's all I'm doing. And I remember thinking, like, surely you're doing more than that though, Rachel, you know, and surely we're aiming for a higher bar than just, you know, Jesus 101. And I'm making peace with it. I think sometimes we are just doing Jesus 101 because it's a valid stage of faith development, you know. And I think when you have that sense of belonging and being loved, that's when you can start doing things, kind of breaking down faith. I'm reminded, Mo, of your comment about like going to these classes and you're like, oh, I feel like my faith is kind of breaking down a little bit. And I think I don't really feel like the breaking it down phase goes as well for most of us if we don't have the community to do it with. And so that's another reason that community comes first, is because students often really need to do some deconstruction in college. And so we put belonging first, and then we have a sense that you can break it down. You can trust God and or the community to hold us until we unpack embedded beliefs and ask questions about them. We look at our religious experiences to that point. And then, of course, as you guessed, you know, after breaking it down comes hopefully building it up. And that's why we get together and we read scripture. I don't preach to them exactly, but I share the word with them, and we tend to discuss it and then share. And we're building up something. I think in some cases to replace what's gone before or to refine it. And then this really wonderful thing will happen is becoming. It is so wonderful to watch students, for instance, really realize a vocation in the context of our community, whether that's to ministry or to something else. And because they've had this experience of belonging, really being able to work on their faith, work on their identity, in light of God or in relationship to God, that they start to imagine really exciting new things. We've got a couple of students going to seminary this fall. I'm very excited about that. So I'm just curious, I'm going to make y'all talk to each other again just for maybe 5 or 6 minutes here, but as you saw that, I'm just curious, is there a stage of faith integration where you feel you most identify right now, or as you look at your life where you think, well, I've often been there? Is one of these, what you come to church kind of looking for the most? I'm curious to just, yeah, maybe in your same twos or threes, just to talk about that. And then we'll talk all together about how the church can support faith development. I'm going to pull us back together. All right. Um, so I'm curious if you figured out where you most identify or resonate, or even kind of which one of these stages feels like it matches you right now. What do you think a church or a community of faith can do, recognizing that its members are probably at different phases at any given time? I'm just kind of curious what that brought forth in you. Yeah. Where did you find yourself? Do you mind if I ask? Where did you find yourself, or where did you resonate the most in here? Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think the belonging part really can't be skipped, and it's tough. I know that that is very hard. My in my own family, it's not like, my older brother and his wife aren't members of church. My little brother kind of dabbled and has other religious practices that aren't Christian. Um, so I'm kind of, the Presbyterian one in three, super Christian. No, um, I yeah. So I hear that. I only know my own story. I sometimes think uh, our own stories is they're our only evangelism. And what happened to me when I was 25 was really just that I had to kind of question everything in my life. My college roommate was killed in an accident, and I kind of spun out, just looking for meaning. I really had never experienced grief like that in my life. Um, and something told me that church or sort of a relationship with God or might help. But I'll tell you what really kind of helped me make that leap was that about a month later, my grandfather, who was a pillar of the church at historic Franklin, also died. He was 89. He'd had a wonderful life. And I went to his funeral. And I remember, with this really fresh grief for a young person, which is different from grief for an old person, I was like, oh, like this is a church. This is what a church does. It's like when someone dies, or when people are in high emotional state, they have a place to go. Um, so that community aspect came back for me so much sooner than any theological aspect. I was very suspicious of the theological side of it, and the community side was what I realized I needed sooner. But sort of because this horrible thing had happened, and I think I think God works with that stuff. Um, and I don't wish bad things on people in order to bring them back to God, or back to a spiritual interest, I should say. Um, God's always interested in us, but it's whether we sort of return the gaze, I suppose. Um, but yeah, yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I hope that that's what's so well said. I hope that that's what things like, these stages, are a reminder, or even just thinking back on your own story, right? Is a reminder that um, everyone is on their own spiritual path. I don't, or I can't do much about anybody else's. What I can do is to create a community where it's okay to be on a spiritual path. Um, I I hope that's what we're doing, you know. And even when I do things like have a Presbyterianism one-on-one, 101 book club or whatever, it's optional. But I want that to support somebody's path towards God. I don't much care if someone becomes a Presbyterian. But everyone has as their birthright a relationship with God. And I want everybody to embrace that however they can. It's really what I believe. I don't know if that's Presbyterian party line, but that's how I feel. We're coming up here to the end of time, so I'm happy to stick around if y'all have questions. I know the 11 o'clock is in 10 minutes though. So I just want to encourage you to keep in touch with us. Keep in touch with me. I really enjoyed spending time with this congregation this summer. It's where I grew up, obviously love it. But this is what I regularly do. I'd love for you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can look at our website, just learn more about what we do, how you can support us. And that's my email address if you want it. So thank you all so much for having me. I'll stick up here for questions for 5 minutes, but I don't want you to miss the, start of the service.